Every day, over 3 million people make their way into the underground tunnels and passageways without a second thought. Most of them travel completely unaware of the history of their surroundings. From the early days of construction through to wartime, there have been thousands of accidental deaths and suicides. Add these to the graves, cemeteries, plague pits and church crypts that the tube's construction has disrupted over the years, and the number of potentially disturbed souls begins to add up to the thousands. This is a journey through the oldest underground network in the world. For the first time ever, men who actually work on the tube have shared their stories. These previously untold experiences will reveal just how haunted the tube really is.
You could hear the doors 1, 2, 3, clunk, click.
I know that I did see this image of a woman.
And all I could do was just sit and look.
It's a little unnerving.
To this day, I can't forget it.
The rhythm of the tube's daily life rarely changes. Before the tube shuts for the night, commuters make their way home in various states, all desperately trying to make sure they catch the last train. Because if it left without them, they would experience a very different place than the one they're used to. The crowds would be gone, replaced by silent, empty and lonely stations and passageways. 24 hours a day, the CCTV from every station in London is monitored by a line controller based in a separate location. In the summer of 2000, the line controller noticed a man standing on a platform at Liverpool Street in central London. This was particularly unusual, as it was 2 o'clock in the morning. The station was closed, and there were no contractors scheduled to be there. On shift that night was Steve Coates, a station supervisor with 23 years of experience. The line controller rang Steve and asked him to investigate.
I asked him if he'd like me to go and have a look. He said he would, as he'd seen somebody wearing white overalls standing in the entrance to the eastbound tunnel. I went down to the central line. I couldn't see anybody as I approached the eastbound tunnel. There was nobody there. I looked into the tunnel, I looked all around. There was nobody present. I walked through to the bottom of the escalators and used the telephone to call the line controller, and I explained to him that I'd carried out an investigation. I'd looked through into the tunnel. I couldn't see anybody there. He said, but this guy was next to you. How could you not see him? So I said, OK, I'll go back and have another look. So I walked through, I looked all around there. Again, I saw nobody. I came back to the telephone, called the line controller and said, there honestly is nobody here. I've looked around. And he said, but I'm telling you, I can see you on my CCTV. You were standing right next to him. I said, are you sure it's not just a blip on your CCTV? And he said, no, the guy was right next to you. And I said, I can promise you there was nobody there. So he said, OK, all right, fine, thanks very much. As I turned and walked back onto the eastbound platform, to my left there was a bench, and on that bench was a white pair of paper overalls. At the time, it made a chill go down my spine. Had anybody walked out of the tunnel while I was on the telephone, I would have seen them. They would have passed the area that I was in. And I certainly did not see anybody wearing white overalls or see anybody placing any overalls on that bench.
From Liverpool Street, if you travel one stop westbound along the Central Line, you arrive at Bank. It's one of the oldest stations on the network and is situated in the heart of London's financial district. Andy Harkness worked for London Underground for 35 years. In 1982, he was working the night shift at Bank. The last train had left, and he'd just begun locking up the station.
I then went down the other lifts, 4, 3, 2, 1. I had a look in number 1, although we hadn't even used the lift. And bearing in mind, these are the old lifts with the old wooden heavy doors. So I looked in the lift, nobody in there, it was clean, shut it down. As I walk across, about 6 foot away from the number 1 lift, there was a knock, 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 knock on the door. And I thought, nah, that's not true, because I've just looked in there, there's nobody there, there's nobody else in there with me, there was no winds, you know, occasionally you could hear these doors rattle, but it wasn't, it was a definite knock, knock, knock. So I thought, nah, this is not happening, so I carried on, ignore it, you know, go away, I'm saying to myself. I walk across then to where the switch room is, I open the switch room, and I wedge open the door and switch the lights off to the old just left on the emergency lights, and I've started to walk across the ticket hall. As I walk across, all of a sudden that door slams, wham, like that, and I wouldn't even look back. There was no wind, no nothing, and it scared the life out of me, and I just, no, that's not happening, like, and I nearly made a mess in my trousers, and off I went, you know, and that was the last time I was working on that side of the station, and I was glad I never went back.
As a passenger, one would hope that incidents like these at Liverpool Street and Bank are fairly few and far between. But the reality is, they're not.
What would a spirit like that be doing down in the London Underground?
It's a strange sort of feeling when something like that happens, especially like if you just don't believe in it.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
Although 1 billion passengers pass through the 253 stations of the London Underground each year, there are still places where passengers never go. One such place is Kennington Loop,